Chinelo a portion she had been given by an older healer who lived on the edge of the village. Once upon a time, in a small village nestled beneath the wide African skies, where the dusty winds whispered secrets and the full moon cast shadows upon the earth, lived Chinelo, a 25-year-old girl with a face kissed by the sun. Her eyes told stories of both innocence and suffering. She lived in the household of her only surviving family member, her uncle Chibuzo, a man whose heart had been long corrupted by desire and darkness. Chibuzo, a respected elder, had taken Chinelo in when her parents died in a car accident 10 years ago. At first, he had been kind. The villagers spoke highly of him for providing for Chinelo, sending her to school and feeding her. They did not know what went on behind the mud brick walls of their home when the village was quiet and the sky turned the color of coal. Every night, as the cricket sang and the wind whistled the thatched roof of their small house, Chibuzo would sneak into Chinelo's room. His heavy steps on the wooden floorboards had become a familiar sound, a symbol of terror that echoed through the silent night. Chinelo had tried to fight him off when it first began, but he was stronger. He had whispered vile words into her ear, telling her that she belonged to him now, that no one would believe her if she ever spoke. For years, Chinelo bore the pain in silence. She lived in a double life by day, a dutiful niece who smiled and greeted the villagers, and by night, a captive to her uncle's cruel desires. The village was her cage, her home, and her prison. Her soul was suffocating in darkness of it all. But even in the deepest pits of despair, a small ember of hope flickered in her heart. She prayed silently each night, speaking to the ancestors, asking for deliverance. One fateful evening, the wind carried with it a sense of change. Chinelo felt it in her bones. She had spent the day alone by the river, the water reflecting the deep blue of the sky above. As she stared into the flowing current, a plan began to form in her mind, a plan that would bring an end to the years of torment. She realized that freedom would not come unless she claimed it for herself. That night, she prepared herself mentally as she lay in her bed, waiting for the inevitable sound of her uncle's approach. She gripped a small veil hidden beneath her pillow, a portion she had been given by an older healer who lived on the edge of the village. The healer, Adaeze, wise and mysterious, had listened without judgment as Chinelo shared her story of suffering. She had given her the veil, saying it would bring her peace. It was a mixture of herbs meant to induce a deep, dreamless sleep too deep to ever wake from. When Chibuzo came that night, the air was thick with the tension of unspoken truths. He took the cup of water Chinelo offered, unaware that it contained the potion. His arrogance has blinded him to her quiet defiance. He drank it down without a second thought, his eyes greedy as always. Soon, his breathing became labored, his body swaying As the portion took effect, he collapsed on the floor, the weight of his sins dragging him into an internal slumber. Chinelo stood over him, her heart racing, but she felt no remorse. The shadows in her room seemed to retreat, as if the darkness that had edged her life was finally lifting. She watched as his body lay still, his chest no longer rising and falling. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of control, a sense of power. She whispered a prayer to the ancestors, thanking them for guiding her hand. The next morning, the village woke to news of Chibuzo's sudden death. Chinelo, now free from his grace, mourned him publicly, but her heart danced in private. She had survived. She had reclaimed her life. With her uncle gone, Chinelo moved to the city, leaving behind the village that held too many painful memories. There, she found work, friends, and most importantly, peace. She carried the scars of her past, but they no longer defined her. She had risen from the shadows of her suffering, and in their place, she found her own light. The village would never know the full truth of what had happened in that small house under the vast African skies. To them, Chibuzo was a man who had done his duty by raising his orphaned niece. But Chinelo knew the real story, and so did the ancestors who had witnessed her torment. She vowed never to be silenced again. Chinelo's life began anew, a life of freedom, a life of strength, and a life in which she was no longer bound by the shadows of her past. The silence that had once shook her was now broken, replaced by the sound of her own voice, strong and unwavering. The lesson in this story is that even in the darkest of circumstances, there is always a path to freedom if one has the courage to seek it. Chinelo's story teaches that no one should endure abuse or oppression in silence, and that self-empowerment and action, though difficult, are necessary for reclaiming one's life. It's a story of hope and liberation, showing that human spirit can rise above even in the most unbearable pain to find peace and a new beginning.